The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the ECAT staff or board of directors.
Giving a voice to the voiceless, pulling stories out of the shadows and putting them under the spotlight, making sure that each person is valued and cared for. This is Humanity First with Peter Evers, presented by BAMSI.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Humanity First. I am Peter Evers, your host, and today we're going to be talking about something, as usual, that's very much in the news. President-elect Trump and Elon Musk have made a pretty big announcement that all federal workers will not have the ability to work from home anymore. He was very direct about this. He said that President Biden had signed a 5-year exemption for federal workers, and he wants those people back at work. And he also said last week that if they didn't come back to work, they'd be dismissed, which is a really interesting take on what has happened over the past 5 years. We have moved away from working entirely at home from March of 2020 to a hybrid model, really, that has benefited an awful lot of people over the last 5 years. We're going to have a conversation with our new Executive Vice President for Human Resources, Hussam Atab, who's been with us about 6 weeks now. And we're going to talk about the future of remote and hybrid work. Does it work? Is there a generational piece to this? Do different generations think about work differently? And also, does it work? Are we getting productivity out of folks when they're working at home? And what are some of the ways that we can measure that productivity? And does an organization have to offer hybrid work when they need to be when they're in a competitive market? It's an interesting and evolving situation that we don't have a great deal of empirical evidence with, but I think most people have an opinion about it. Some people want to be line of sight. They want people in the office all the time. And some people just say, why are we spending money on square footage of rental of office space? Lots of different opinions about this, and we're going to tease them out when we come back. Stick around.
Hi, I'm Jamie. I'm an essential worker here at BAMSI, and I'm a nurse. Nurses are essential here at BAMSI because as nurses, we really have the opportunity to make an impact. We have very small ratios, so we have the opportunity to really learn everything about the person served and be able to give the best care. It really serves such a great purpose for me as being a nurse and really why I came into nursing. Learn more about nursing opportunities at bamsijobs.org.
Giving a voice to the voiceless, pulling stories out of the shadows and putting them under the spotlight, making sure that each person is valued and cared for. This is Humanity First with Peter Evers, presented by BAMSI.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Humanity First. And as promised in the preview, we have Hussam Atab with us. Hussam, how are you?
I'm good, Peter. How are you?
It's really good to have you on the show. Thank you so much for doing that, Hussam.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Hussam is our EVP, our Executive Vice President of Human Resources here at BAMSI, where I work. And a couple of things I just wanted to say before we start for people who are watching this as opposed to listening. We are dressed rather casually today, which is, there's a reason for that. It's not just because it's the holidays. But this morning we were both at our volunteering event, which is our food drive, which takes place every third Thursday of the month. And we start off at 7 o'clock in the morning, taking about 17,000 pounds worth of food and packing it into trucks to deliver to the tower blocks in and around Brockton. So if anybody's listening and is interested in doing that, I would absolutely ask you to go to bamsi.org, really simple, and sign up as a volunteer. First of all, it's a good workout. I think I got 11,000 steps this morning within 3 hours. The other thing is you get an amazing sense of achievement and accomplishment in terms of helping people. And this isn't just at the holidays. We do it every month. And finally, you get to meet people. You'll get to meet people from all different walks of life who come. In fact, today we had the Starbucks, and so a big shout out to Starbucks who came and volunteered, bought some lovely gifts for us, including candles and those sippy mug things that everybody loves. And so there might be something in it for you as well, as well as coffee. And did you have a good time this morning?
It was awesome. I mean, the music was awesome. We had a few dancers there.
Yeah.
It was great, and everybody was so helpful, and it was my first time, it was just exhilarating just to see the community get together, and we all work in different programs, some we don't know, and we just all work together. And it was a lot of food to move around. It was great.
It was.
Loved it.
It
Exhilarating.
was. In fact, I was doing my John Travolta dance, and I said to somebody, "This is John Travolta," and they said, "Who on earth is John Travolta?" And so, Saturday Night Fever has not stood the test of time, I guess, not surprisingly. But that's obviously not what we're talking about today. Although volunteerism in our communities is incredibly important, but we're going to talk about work today, and we're going to talk about what has been going on since the pandemic, because again, the pandemic was another sliding doors moment, wasn't it, for so many things, but also importantly here, what we're talking about, this idea of working from home, this idea of a hybrid workplace. This has stirred up many conversations over the last week, because the new administration that's coming in January under Trump is really making a point. He and Elon Musk are saying that everybody who's a federal worker will have to come back to work or they'll be dismissed, which I'm not surprised about for many reasons. But it does conjure up a conversation that hopefully we're going to have, which is, well, what's happened with this hybrid working from home thing? Because if you think about it, we've gone through a period of change in a very, very concertinaed period of time. We started doing this on March 15th or 16th, that's the ISA mark, in 2020. We all went home. We were sent home, right? IT was struggling. We were getting old computers out of the basement and giving them to people. Incredible work went on to make sure that there was a continuity of the work we're doing. But now I guess we might be at another pivot point. And one of the questions I want to ask you, Hussam, who's been in retail, has worked in big government contracts and now human services, has it worked? I mean, how would you encapsulate that history over the last 5 years? Have we been more productive or not? Are we more attractive as an employer if we're offering that? And by the way, not everybody can have a hybrid work, and we'll get to that in a minute. But what do you think?
Well, Peter, the empirical research is still not clear. I think the jury is out for remote work. Obviously, it was a bit of a proof of concept that everybody was sent home, and we had to deal with it. And a lot of people's homes weren't set up for office environment, and there weren't the right sort of voice over IP that people could use to actually do calls. And people didn't know how to engage, and what's the etiquette on Zoom and on Teams,
and HIPAA, right?
And HIPAA violations as well. So I think they called it a proof of concept. Like, we went into it, we didn't know what we're going to expect. I think now that we're sort of 4 years in or 3 years in, I think, organizations are starting to realize that it may work in certain industries. But a lot of organizations are pulling back, and they're bringing employees back to the office. And so now the new norm is hybrid. Before it was remote. Mm-hmm. Now companies are expecting staff to come in a couple of days a week at least. And there are companies, financial services, Amazon is another, where they've, instructed their employees to come to work 5 days a week. And I think it really depends on the industry. Research showed there are some industries like technology where this can work. But in our industry, like social care, when you're providing this personalized service, you cannot do it remotely.
Right. Well, here's a question for you then, because, as I'm thinking about it, we had this amazing moment for sort of enforced innovation, didn't we? Because right. I think the notion of Teams and Zoom, because Zoom just became a word that was used by everybody immediately, had been on the periphery of the workspace, hadn't it, for a while? And 10 years ago, I was using it. We did some work with a Sri Lankan company, and we set up a video back then, but all of a sudden we had to do it, right? All of a sudden we had to embrace this new culture. And some people liked it and some people didn't. is the genie out of the bottle in a way here in terms of a new and emerging workforce generation-wise? Saying it's all over now, you have to come back to work, that's not without peril either, right?
Right. So, there has been various acceptance of remote working, and it is generational. So you've got, at the moment in the workforce, you've got at least 4 generations. You've got the baby boomers, who were, people who were born between 1948 and 1964. And then you've got the Gen X's, people who were born 1965 to 1980. And then you've got the millenniums, who were born 1981 till the 90s. And then you've got the Gen Zs, right? The baby boomers, they prefer the in-person. That's what research is showing.
This sort of line of sight management.
Yeah. The Gen X's are a little bit adaptable, and they're sitting in between. They're like sandwiched in. They believe in, we can adapt to hybrid, and we're used to the in-person. The millenniums believe in remote. And then the Gen Zs, because of the influence of social media and a little bit of isolation, they prefer the hybrid model. So I think there's, it's interesting how different generation perceive how they would like to work. But obviously, the younger generation believe in a lot of flexibility. They want flexibility. Right. So even though the Gen Zs, they prefer hybrid, but they prefer to set their own timing in terms of what they come to the office.
That really piqued my interest, the difference between millennials and Z, because I think as a boomer, early boomer, like I would say, it is interesting to me that there's a difference there. And when you talk about social media, when you think about Gen Zs, they're the first generation of people coming into the workforce who had the super computer in their hand from age 5, 6. Right. Even my children who are in their 30s now missed out on that, and I actually think that's a good thing. But amazing distinction there around people who want to be hybrid and people who want to be remote. When we have conversations, and we talked about this last week, when we have conversations about difference in generations, and it's usually the older generations who are sort of besmirching the way in which young people do things. And by the way, that didn't happen just now. It's happened all the way through time, exactly. When I were a lad kind of thing. So talk a little bit as well about that difference, especially in this idea that you want more independence, that you're less likely to follow orders, if you like, which my memory, I think I told you about when I was working in England, in Nottingham. You had a big horn would blow at 8:45, and you had to be at your desk. And then you'd have 15-minute breaks. I never thought anything of it. I thought, well, okay, I'll do that. People are less likely to say, okay, I'll do that now, right?
That's right. So obviously the millenniums and Gen Zs, they believe in a lot of flexibility. And it's a different way of managing staff for millenniums and Gen Zs than it is obviously with Gen X's and boomers. And we talk about different things like feedback. Gen Zs and millenniums prefer a lot of feedback, and they like to make their own schedules. They believe in being creative and creating impact. And like I think about my son, who he's been in the workforce now for a year while he was in college. His main motive for changing jobs is flexibility.
Yeah. Not money.
Mm-hmm. Money is not the driving factor. It's flexibility.
Right. And they don't want big cars either, do they?
No. They're pretty content about they've got different sort of outlooks in life.
But let me ask you this question, because is that more generational thing, or is that just an age thing? Because I think people at that age are much more wanting to be inspired. They're much more trying to find their way, and they don't necessarily, I certainly didn't think, well, what's it going to be like when you're 55, when you're 60, or whatever that is. So there's a little bit of both in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, obviously I haven't done the research on it, but I can, cite from my personal example. Like my son, for example, I always bring him in to the conversation. He didn't he didn't work on his communication skills. And as he evolved in the workforce, he started thinking about these other elements that he never really paid attention to. So I think as Gen Zs evolve in the workplace, I think their views are going to change about stuff. Where are they going to go? We don't know, but
Right.
it's an evolution.
Right. Let's pivot for a second because we have a few minutes left. What about this? Let's get down to the business argument for hybrid work, right?
Right.
And as you said, the jury is still a little bit out on this. But one of the things I think the older managers and directors and people like that worry about is productivity. You know, we have so many ways, different ways of measuring people's productivity these days in almost every job, I think. So you would think that the shift would be away from you've got to be at your desk at 8, you don't leave till 5. But at the same time, it's trust and test, isn't it? It's
right.
I trust you to do your work, but I'm going to check that the work is done because the business case is that productivity is what we should be aiming for, highest productivity
right.
possible.
Right. So, I mean, you know, the research that I've read, a lot of the surveys that were done for people who do remote work, and this is not in the human services industry. So, you know, they feel more productive than coming into the office and commuting. However, there's also similar surveys and research that show that they're less engaged because they are isolated, right? So, you know, the productivity conversation, you know, it's still out there. And I think they need to define what are the things they need to be looking for and how to do surveys to really kind of produce some empirical data around productivity. Right. But, you know, organizations, especially, you know, human services and financial services, you know, they do believe that people are much more productive being in the office, even government agencies, much more productive being in the office as compared, you know, to IT, technology.
Right. And of course, yeah, there are so many things that you can do. There are so many jobs where you could work at home.
Correct.
But we are pack animals, aren't we?
We are.
We do like to be around each other. You know, people talk about lack of productivity when people are around the water cooler, I think we say here. But there is something important in culture, in work cultures about the ability of people to do that. And I know for a fact that it's not the same if you have a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting as if you're in the office together. Maybe that's me being old-fashioned. But I guess what I would say is that if Amazon is saying people have to come back to the workplace, they're not making that decision on a cultural, philosophical basis. They must be making it on, this is what I'm getting from you when you're at work. This is what I'm getting from you at home. So I tend to go with that business case, especially when you're looking at empirical evidence, which is proving whether it works or not. Now, the final thing, I suppose, is we have to be competitive as a workplace, right?
Correct.
And so by saying, I mean, federal workers, you can say that to federal workers because many of them are vested. They're going to be there for the rest of their lives. Not here, right? So we have to offer this, I would have thought, in places where we can, to people to be competitive in the labor market.
Correct. Yeah. So I think, you know, with the challenges we have in human services and, you know, the shortage of staff, you know, inclusive practices really help to attract talent from different generations. But I think, you know, you're right about culture, right? So, you know, companies who have hybrid or remote workforce, you know, are still finding ways. How do we build a culture with that? How do we build engagement? What does that engagement look like? So, you know, it's still early days. I think people are still figuring it out. But I think, you know, a lot of organizations, you know, are moving towards more of a hybrid workforce. So they can, you know, be a bit more inclusive with the multi-generations in their workforce.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I guess I always like to end on the people who do this work in our field, the people who are in the homes, who are doing, you know, shifts, overnight shifts and second shifts and weekends. They're what basically keep us running. If we didn't have them, we wouldn't have an agency, and they cannot and do not have the opportunity to ask for hybrid. It would be difficult to do that work other than with that person, whether you're looking after their hygiene or, you know, you're taking them out into the community. And those are the people who I think about often when we're having a conversation around what is best for the workforce, because they do not have that option. And I just want to celebrate those, our residential workers, our direct care professionals, and our nurses, because they're the people that make our organization work. But it's been a great conversation, Hussam. I really appreciate it. I think it's something that we need to keep revisiting, right, and talking
Absolutely.
about, because we're gathering more and more evidence about
it's such a changing dynamics. The workplace, how it was 5-10 years ago, is very, very different than what it is today.
Yeah.
And it's going to evolve quite quickly.
Yeah. So we'll keep an eye on it, and you'll come back on the show.
Definitely.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Hussam.
Thank
Take
you,
care,
Peter.
everybody, and happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone.